Hello and welcome again to the Georgian Book Club. And this week we are having a look at another Samuel Johnson. We like Dr. Johnson here. And we're having a look at his little novella, Rasselas. But before we start, remember there is our shop where we have books and writing services. There is also our Redbubble shop where we have over 100 designs. So if you want to support this channel, that's how you can support us. If you want to support us but you don't have money to spare, that is absolutely fine. Like, subscribe, comment and share these videos. And that is an absolutely equally valid and much appreciated way of you supporting us if you are enjoying these. And now we start with Rasselas. So it's in a Big Johnson because I wasn't buying a separate Rasselas when the Big Johnson has Rasselas. So what is Rasselas? Rasselas, Prince of Abyssinia, is it's a story that is fitting into the 18th century taste for exotica. Rasselas is a prince in Abyssinia. He comes from a place called the Happy Valley, where the kings of Abyssinia, or as it is now known, and it has always been known to the people of Ethiopia, the highlands of Ethiopia. He and his brothers and sisters and the other younger members of the Ethiopian aristocracy are secluded in this place called the Happy Valley. And this is a place where every want, every need could be met. But they can't leave. Not until either they are married to someone or that their succession appears. So they live in this very secluded, very protected highland valley, which is at the same time a little bit more than a gilded prison, as the complaint of people who have queued and vied to become part of the entertainment of Happy Valley soon realize is that once you go in, you don't come out again. And Rasselas is the fourth son of an Ethiopian king or an Abyssinian king, and he has grown bored of his life in the Happy Valley. He's 26 years old and he would like to see outside of the world, the outside world, the world that he is not able to see. He is safe, but he is secluded. And how is he to be a king when his time comes if he never sees anything of the world and doesn't understand it? Hearing about it is not the same as first-hand experience. So he talks to a couple of people who have come from the outside world, and one is an inventor who proposes a flying machine, but that fails. The other is a man named Imlach who has travelled extensively. He is the son of a wealthy merchant. He was given an option of either joining his father in his business or being given money and travelling and seeing what he can do with that. And so Imlach has travelled quite widely. He felt that his need for travel had come to an end, and therefore he had gone to Happy Valley. And like Rasselas, he is feeling constrained by the nature of the Happy Valley. And so he agrees to help Rasselas escape. They are soon joined by Nakaya, his sister, and her lady-in-waiting Pekua. And they all four leave the Happy Valley, with Imlach working as their guide to the outside world. They visit the city alongside the sewers, where they eventually get a boat and go to Egypt. And it's in Egypt where their learning of the world really begins, because what they are seeking is, what is the secret to happiness? How do you be happy? And they meet a whole load of different people. They meet a Stoic whose philosophy is all very well when things are going well, but when the Stoic's daughter dies, he finds that his philosophy is not sufficient to help him cope with the grief of this. That really, it's all well and good in theory until a real tragedy happens, and he finds that his stoicism is insufficient to cope with the grief of the loss of his daughter. They look at politics, they look at hermits, they look at married life. Nakaya and Pekua go and find out about married life and domestic life, while Imlach and Rasselas go and find out about the public life, the world of politics and court life. And surely being wealthy and powerful would make you happy, but no. And does marriage make you happy? Not exactly. Do children make you happy? Not exactly. Does celibacy therefore make you happy? Not exactly. There is then an expedition to the pyramids where Pekua is frightened of the pyramids and refuses to go in, and while she is waiting is abducted by a band of Arabs who carry her off, and while she is there with them waiting to be ransomed, she discovers their way of life, and she sees the world of the harem and the women in the harem, and how different her understanding of the world, because Rasselas, Pekua, Imlach and Nakaya are all Coptic Christians. They are from communities that were part of the very earliest part of the Christian church in Northern Africa and the Near East. So the world of the Arabs is quite different to the world that Pekua understands. So she is ransomed. They meet an astronomer who has gone mad in his isolation and his solitude, and they bring him back to reason through their company. And by the end of the book, they all have ideas of what could make them happy, except that ultimately the whole point is that there is no singular point of happiness, and happiness and sadness, happiness and anger, happiness and despondency are all intermingled with one another. The happiness and contentment of the Stoic is not sufficient to overpower the grief at the loss of his daughter. Nakaya's privilege and freedom of being out of the Happy Valley is not enough to overcome her grief at the loss of Pekua as they're waiting to find out about her. Nor is her grief at the loss of Pekua sufficient to completely undo the possibility of future happiness. No state being singular, no choice being the only one. Which is part of the reason why they got so bored in Happy Valley in the first place, because although no want was neglected, they had no choices. And ultimately, they do return to the Happy Valley. But they return to the Happy Valley having an expanded concept of the world and a different understanding of how the world works and how they work, that they can have ideas and they can think. So it's a funny little book. It does superficially resemble Candide, where Candide is, but Dr. Pangloss says this is the best of all possible worlds. But unlike Candide, Rasselas is not a satire. Candide has a lot of events happening, and a lot of dire things overtake the characters in Candide. And Candide rises up and says yet again, after whatever has befallen them, the army invading their home, shipwreck, whatever. But Dr. Pangloss says this is the best of all possible worlds, and he only stutters at that in the face of the suffering of slaves. But Rasselas is not a satire. Rasselas is more of a moral meditation. Not a lot happens. Like, the most exciting thing is Pekua gets abducted at the pyramids. That's the most exciting event of the entire story. And even then, we only hear that reported to us from the servants at the tents after Rasselas and Imlach and Nakaya return from visiting the pyramids. So it's not a story of huge events happening. Candide has lots and lots of events happening. It's a story of a lot of discussions. A lot of thoughtful discussions. And this is something that makes this kind of interesting, because these are meditations on life and happiness. They are very English meditations on life and happiness in the mouths of Ethiopian royalty. But one of the things, and I think this is particular to Johnson, and it is particular to the period in the 18th century that Johnson is writing, because although you have English colonies in Northern America, although you have English colonies, I think you just have the colonies in America at this time. Australia hasn't. This is pre-Captain Cook's voyage of discovery through the South Pacific, and the Pacific Islands and Australia. This is pre the Crown's takeover of the English interests in India. At this point, the East India Company is in India, and that particular situation is not technically colonial. It is mercantile. It's a fairly exploitative mercantile relationship, but it is not a position where England has that sovereignty over India. Africa has not yet been carved up. The Middle East has not been carved up. East Asia has not been carved up. So he is talking at a pre-colonial point. The Ottoman Empire is big and powerful. It contains Greece. It contains aspects of elements of Eastern Europe. They're fighting with the Austrians a lot at this point in time. So the idea that there is the white supremacist notion has not become baked into European ideals at this point yet. This is something that will happen later. Slavery is an element of this world, yes, but it is also a case that the social Darwinism is not there. The racialization, the very schematized idea of racial superiority has not entered European thought yet. And that makes this quite interesting because 19th century people criticized Rasselas for the fact that his Ethiopian royalty speak and discourse with the same sort of rationality and logic as educated English people. And so he is using a very exotic world because, hey, that's going to attract people's attention. People are going to want to see that. Why else does Candide go to South America? It's more interesting to have this exotic world, but he does not treat Rasselas and Imlach and Pekua and Nikaya as inferior in any way, shape or form. In fact, Nikaya and Rasselas discuss between themselves. There is not even that same sort of sexist attitude that will very much come in a lot more by the 19th century that did come along with the racial things, that male superiority over women, because a European ideal of the 18th century for women, although they are not going to the universities, is a woman should be, a woman of a certain class, a woman of this sort of class, should be able to discuss, should be educated enough to be able to converse intelligently. Remember, the great salons are generally hosted by women. So women provide a lot of the social lubrication for the world that Johnson knows. The literary world especially requires women's social lubrication, the salons for the men, the writers to go to. The fact that there are, and Johnson was a big champion of women writers in the 18th century. I think you see in the character of Nikaya, who, yes, she goes and investigates the domestic sphere. Why? Because the domestic and the political sphere are quite different, and they are segregated. She has more ability to enter the domestic sphere. Rasselas has more ability to enter court and the political sphere. But Rasselas trusts his sister and has as much respect for his sister's opinion to send her on this important mission and to not do this himself, to not think, oh, well, my sister couldn't possibly understand this. And although he argues with her, she counters very, very logically and vigorously with her own observations. So it is a very interesting book. A book that you would assume, given its time period, might be, oh, is this racist? Or, oh, is this sexist? Is actually doesn't really fall into either. Now, one other element is that they do talk about Europe. Why has Europe got colonies and we don't? Why does Europe make incursions into our land and we don't do this in reverse? So there is, while there is an acknowledgement of European military and technical superiority, it's not spoken of as racial superiority. There is nothing inherently in the Europeans, according to the narrator, or Imlach in particular, but according to Johnson's worldview, that make the Europeans inherently better. Nothing racially. It's merely a case of they are technologically and militarily superior. Because this is Europe of the 18th century. This is one of, Europe's never been particularly good at unifying. Unified Europe is a rare, rare thing. This is a world where they have sort of calmed down enough after the religious wars of the 16th century to go, you know what? I think we better stop doing that for a bit because this is ridiculous. But, by the end of the century, war will be happening again. Napoleon will march his great jackboots across Europe. So it's not as if Europe is this unified, stable place that gives them any sort of superiority. It merely is the fact that they happen to have these advantages. It is not a racial or or even really a cultural thing. It's not because Rasselas and Imlach and Johnson accept that the pyramids of Egypt, the Great Wall of China, neither of which are European inventions, are the pinnacles of human ingenuity. So it is quite an interesting book from that perspective. Johnson is a remarkably modern thinking man. He is a remarkably modern thinking man, which I think makes him far more readable than a lot of other things, especially some later things that really have once you have that racialization coming into writing, it really damages a lot of the writing as it's produced. Johnson doesn't have that, so I think that is a major benefit of this. One of the final things that I think I wanted to talk about is thinking about the Happy Valley. I think the Happy Valley particularly is something that we as modern readers are really, in some ways, we are inhabitants of the Happy Valley. I mean, we have luxuries that the people of the 18th century, the wealthiest people of the 18th century, did not have. We have hot and cold running water. We have electric power. We have heating that works in our homes. We have huge luxuries that, even if equivalents were available to a hot bath in the 18th century, it was reliant upon the labour of servants and of poor people. We can have a bath without having to have some poor scullery maid bring buckets of water up the back steps to fill our bath. We live in this extraordinary luxury and privilege, and yet we are bored. And I think that's something that gives this a degree of the having your wants met, having any desire met. I mean, if I want something, I can go clickety 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 and someone will post it to me. I go to my job, I get the money, it's easy. These are things that were not available. These were things that weren't really available when I was a little kid. I mean, buy a lot of the things that I buy now, I couldn't buy them when I was a little kid. I certainly couldn't get things from overseas that hadn't been released here. I mean, it's Australia. We suffered the Australia tax. We didn't even get movies on time. So we live in this unbelievable luxury. And yet, it's so easy to take that for granted. It's so easy to say, well, I can do this, but I can't afford to take a plane somewhere. I was like, and I think that's something that that is in the nature of happiness. Happiness is something that it requires choice. It requires people to have a purpose. I think part of the reason why people are bored in the Happy Valley is that they don't have a purpose. It is a waiting room. It is a very luxurious waiting room, but it is a waiting room. And I think one of the dangers of modern life is that we treat our lives like they're a waiting room for something better, some other thing. And that's what Rasselas and his companions have sort of done, is they go out into the world, they want to find this, and then it's a solution. That'll be the solution, and then they will never be bored again. Except that you get familiar with things. You get overly familiar with things, and then they become boring. How often do you think about things that you bought that you thought, I buy this thing and it will, and that's all I will need. It will make my life complete. And then, 6 weeks later, 6 months later, there's another thing. There's another thing. We are creatures of constant desires. And you can choose, I would like to not desire things, but I don't know that it's actually possible to not desire things. I think that you can choose not to desire to spend on things. You can certainly do that, but we seek novelty. We seek novelty. That is why there are new acts coming into the Happy Valley all the time to try and keep these secluded princes and princesses entertained. There is the novelty of being entertained wears off easily. And when you look at the choices that Rasselas and Nikaya and Pekua make about what they would like to do. Nikaya would like to start a school and teach other women about what she has learnt. Pekua would like to be the prioress of a convent. And Rasselas would like to have a little kingdom somewhere. And at the moment, they think that would be quite good, but at the same time, they still don't do it. Just the anticipation of it seems to make them happy. They are content to return to the Happy Valley. They have made their excursions out into the world. They have seen things that would furnish their mind with choices. And yet they still return. They could have run away and made these desires happen, but they've seen enough that they know that that happiness is not a singular state. And what would happen if they never returned? Would they actually be happy? Would they start to miss the world that they had known? But they now have a choice. And it's the choice, the ability to choose that makes them happy. I also sort of think, because I generally relate things back to writing, and I'm currently writing at the moment. I also think about the Happy Valley as siloing yourself off into a particular style or a particular genre of writing. And I've been thinking about this because I've been thinking about a lot of the things around AI and the fact that there are now AI written books coming out, and people are kind of freaking out that this will completely destroy their livelihood. And I think that AI can only reproduce what's in the Happy Valley. AI can only reproduce what has already existed. Can't actually innovate. And I think that as creative people, we have to leave the Happy Valley. We have to leave what we're comfortable in order to maintain our creativity. Now, it's quite scary to leave the happy valley. It's quite scary. This is why the majority of the people in there don't leave. 4 people leave. The majority of the people stay their lives, or however long it is, in the happy valley. But I think thinking about this, there are definitely reproducible genres, shall we put it that way. Genres that are so convention laden, and I've talked about, people here have talked about being stuck in convention laden genres. I think Hatta has. Very, very much. Now, I think partly this is because it's very scary to step out into something and not know if there is an audience waiting for you. Yeah. But it's also can be very dangerous to stay put when the waters are rising around your feet, or the pot you're in starts to warm up. The danger of being the frog in the pot is far outweighs the danger of jumping out of said pot or finding some high ground. And I think that the happy valley is a bit like, leaving the happy valley is a bit like that. Those characters have no idea what is going to be on the other side of the mountains. They could be set upon by thieves and carried off into slavery, or, you know, anything could happen to them. But they take that risk and they go off and they have an adventure. And I think about the fact that the novel as a form has always been changing. And I think much like every artist who has been faced with a new technology that has threatened what they did, it's innovation and experimentation that will get you out of there, out of the happy valley. But innovation and experimentation require wide reading. I really enjoy innovative writing, but it's not something that has a big audience. Part of the reason why I like the 18th century is the writing is different. It is innovative. You don't generally find 2 novels that are the same. It hasn't locked in the way that the 19th century locked in. And so I think that the happy valley is a metaphor for getting out of your comfort zone. Leave the happy valley. You may return, but you'll probably return knowing a lot more that can keep you ahead of something that A, can't innovate, and B, can only do what has gone before. So, and I think that there are definitely going to be certain styles that it's not going to be able to replicate. Satire, for one. Satire is extremely hard to do. And it talks about a power imbalance. And I was actually kind of surprised that Rasselas wasn't a satire. I was expecting it to be a satire, but I'm reading it and it's like, this isn't a satire. That's interesting. We will look at more satire. I like satire. I especially like the 18th century satire, but we will look at some more of that. I'm not sure what we're going to have a look at next. I'll have a think, and I'll either be here shortly or in a while. We may have another look at Tom Jones. We might. Depends on how much time I have. But I will be back with something else. I do hope you enjoyed Rasselas. And, yeah. Goodbye. If you would like to support this channel, come across to the Black Cockie Press website, www.blackcockiepress.com.au, where you will find books and other writing services to help with your writing.